Welcome back, everyone, to Ty's Training, Talking with My Dad. This is our 30th episode. This is the first episode of season 3 of the show. Thank you guys so much for being here for the first 2 seasons. If you're new, welcome. This is now the week of November 17th, 2025. I'm Ty, and as always, joined with my co-host and wonderful father, Tim Andrews, aka Mr. C, and our sometimes guest star, Theodosia the cat, if you're watching on video here. And this is for another look at training and life in the middle of what has now become this multi-year journey that we have dubbed Project Himalaya. Mr. C, are you excited to be back and give the fans what they want and dive back into it?
Absolutely. Yes, I've been inundated with requests to be back on the air, as you can imagine. So very excited to be back here.
But I actually have. They have had people say, when is it coming back? When's it coming back? So it's been, like 6 weeks or something. So here we are.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. It's a lot of fun and happy to be here with my co-sponsor, Thea, the cat.
Excellent.
Okay, so it's been a while. In fact, around 2 months since we did the wrap-up, very emotional upper side after your fall Everest attempt this year. And a lot has happened since then. You've taken what I certainly perceive to be your first real break because you're such a workaholic in your training and your, as I call it, your monk, not in the Monk the TV character, although there's kind of a little bit of that too, but as in monks who live in monasteries kind of behavior, very ritualistic and so controlled. But you've taken a big break from that. You've been all over the world, literally just about. And in fact, I can barely keep up with it. You've been so many different places. And I know you've been seriously thinking about where we go from here. So today we're going to catch up on all of that and talk through some of the big decisions you're facing coming up for the new year, 2026. And you've got an exciting announcement, I hear, about a very exciting public event happening right where you are right now in Boulder, Colorado. So let's get into that. First question. Okay. What's it been like stepping away from everything, the podcast routine, and maybe more importantly, your incredibly strict and heavy training routine for these past 2 months? What made you feel like it was the right time to bring it back?
It's funny because this has been, like you said, the first really substantial break I've taken probably in about 2 years. I think the last one was basically when I got Achilles surgery, which was not the most restful break, kind of stressful time. But really since then, it's been 2 years of pretty much like one thing after the other between rehabbing and then racing and then Manaslu and then the big spring Everest season and then very quick turnaround to the fall Everest season. So there really hasn't been a big kind of macro level break. And one of the things that I think about as a coach and an athlete is this idea of periodization on the very big scale. So looking at things as seasons, and ideally you do have, at least once or twice a year, these kind of longer downtimes where you're really not pushing the body and the mind in the same way that we do during training. So physically and mentally, you're giving yourself a little bit of a break where you back off, not necessarily that you don't exercise at all, because like we were just talking about, I think we both are exerciseaholics and just love the feeling of exercising, but that it doesn't have the same urgency and it's not as strict and structured as it is during training. It's really more about feeling good and feeling healthy. So that's really been a joy, honestly, these last couple of months, because I did feel like I was burning the candle at both ends a little bit over the last year. And I think I had penciled this whole kind of October through December as a downtime. And I literally wrote notes to myself that were like, don't worry about training, don't race at all for the rest of the year. So I kind of took the Annie Duke idea of making the decision ahead of time so that I could set myself up, because I knew that as soon as I got there, maybe I'd take 1 week low and then I'd want to kind of get back into it because that's my personality. And so it was very helpful to have these kind of notes from my past self being like, no, don't do that. Like, just relax, see your friends, have fun, travel, get some exercise, but do it for fun, do crazy stuff that you wouldn't necessarily do in training, enjoy it, all that stuff. So it's been really, really nice, honestly. It's also the other really big notable part of this is that this is by far the longest I've spent away from altitude, essentially at sea level since, I don't even know how long, like certainly for years. I was in Nepal until basically the end of September. And then I was in Thailand, I was in Japan, I was in Massachusetts, California, back to Japan, back to Massachusetts, Canada. So, but all these places were sea level. And I have felt just that my body was really grateful for that. I was able to really feel like I was recovering and enjoying life and just feeling better, other than this really frustrating cold, which might manifest at some point during this episode. That's I got again from burning the candle at both ends a little bit, but overall, yeah, it's been fantastic. It's been really good, and it's making me hungry for the upcoming block, which we'll dive into more detail about.
Yeah, I hear you. In fact, you're right. I like to exercise a lot. Not certainly nothing like you do, but I do like to exercise. I like to play tennis, and I have had similar periods where, for whatever reason, I just haven't been able to exercise for a period of time. And while I hate it because I like the endorphins and lots of other things that the exercise brings, and it's a ritual for me, so there's that too. But on the other hand, I notice that everything feels better. Just
Yeah,
about everything feels better if you're not pressing it all the time. So there is some moderation benefit in taking a little bit of time off. So let's talk about what happened at Mount Everest this fall and what you've learned from it. So for listeners who might have missed it, can you give us a brief recap on what happened on the fall Everest attempt and how you've processed that experience for the last couple of months now that you've had a little time for reflection?
absolutely. The first thing I want to do is just shout out two amazing individuals who were successful with their fall Everest projects. One of whom was Andre, and I'm going to mispronounce his last name, so I won't even try. But if you just look up Andre, the skier on Everest, you'll find him. And he skied all the way down the south face of Everest, basically the route that I was trying to climb without oxygen. Unbelievable, from the summit to all the way through the icefall to base camp. Just absolutely incredible achievement. And then on the north side, we had a Jim Morrison, not the singer Jim Morrison, but Jim Morrison, the skier. And that was also a multi-year project. Both these guys, multi-year projects with various other attempts. And Jim skied a line called, I think it's called the Magic Line, which is basically connecting two really aesthetic steep couloirs on the north side of Everest in Tibet. And I think it had only been climbed like less than 10 times. So not only did he climb this route that was incredibly hard and risky, but then he was the first person ever to ski down what is objectively probably the most aesthetic single line on Everest. I think it's like 14,000 feet of descent in a single line, which is just
Wow.
unbelievable. Huge kudos to those guys. They pulled it off, and just unbelievable to see what they did and see some of the footage coming out of there. So definitely go give those guys a Google, check out they've both got kind of short videos, I think, that are out now. And I think there's probably longer stuff coming. So anyways, first, props where props are due. Second, yeah, my own expedition obviously didn't go as well. I think it was a little bit of a gamble, and we knew that going in. I really, really wanted to get the project done, and I felt like I had the motivation in the summer, which is why we tried to do it in the fall. And I think in some ways, I don't regret that decision at all. The fall offers a lot of potential positives in that the mountain is way less crowded. And in that, can be way more selective about what day we go up and really pick the best weather day possible. That said, the fall, we knew it was going to be more snow significantly. And that's exactly what we encountered. And that was the really big problem. So I made 2 attempts going up the mountain. The first time, a variety of problems. We had some small avalanche debris to deal with. I had kind of a scary fall into a crevasse. That was a little bit traumatizing. And luckily I was okay and was able to move on. But that kind of ruined that first attempt. And the second attempt went better. I made it all the way up to Camp 4, and we just got up there and the snow was just totally untenable. There was way too much. A bunch had fallen. And I could see very quickly that it just wasn't going to happen, at least in terms of the record. And even just going to the summit to try and tag the summit, which, I was pretty interested in. It just didn't feel like that was the right call safety wise. So yeah, overall, we came back, learned a lot. Everybody got off the mountain safely, which is always the most important thing. And it's one of these, like, it reminded me that the mountain is really complicated and there's a lot of stuff outside of your control. That was kind of my biggest takeaway. And now with a couple months looking back, it's, I'm still disappointed, but I feel like it was the right call. And I know I'm preempting your next question here, so maybe I'll get into that. But, I don't see that there was anything we could have done differently in the fall. There was just an awful lot of snow up there. It was really soft snow, and it was great for skiing, which is like fantastic for Andre and Jim. But it wasn't fantastic for speed climbing. So it's one of these things where you do have to gamble a little bit ahead of time and say, okay, we know there's going to be more snow. We know that's going to make it a little slower. But the difference between a little slower and a lot slower was kind of the problem that we faced in the fall, in that there really was not any kind of trodden path up high in the mountain because there were so few people. So again, you even have kind of a double-sided coin there with the crowds, because that is one of the benefits of the crowds, is they stamp down a nice path for you. Um, and again, we knew all this going in, and it's just that was a risk that we were willing to take. And when we got up there, it just wasn't going to happen. And I think it's one of these things where, again, going back to Annie Duke, you have to have your kind of quitting criteria and understand, this is a day where it's worth pushing and where we're going to go through and do it and make it happen, even if there is some risk. And there's some times where you make that calculation and there are certain red lines that you're crossing and it just doesn't make sense from a safety or a performance perspective. And that's kind of where we ended up. So I felt like my preparation was great. My fitness was great. My decision making was good on the mountain. And again, we really just kind of need the mountain to cooperate in order to get the project done.
Yep. Yeah. And I don't know if you want to add anything about your decision not to make the summit, because that was what I was going to ask about next, but I think you've sort of expressed that you feel good about that. And as your father, I feel good about it because you were very mature in your decision-making process. And as you said, there was just so much snow. I think it was
Yeah,
both quite an unusually late monsoon season and a big monsoon season, which just meant there was a lot of snow and it was there much later. And then even
exactly.
more came that particular time when you got all the way up to sea. There were, my attitude is, well, if the Sherpas aren't willing to go up, that's a pretty good sign because they do this every day for a living during the spring at
Exactly.
least. So they have a pretty good sense of when it's safe to go up. And if they're saying, nope, not a good day for it today, then it's just not a good day for it. So anything you add from that, you wanted to add to that, given a couple of months distance?
No, I think you kind of summed it up. The only thing I would add, when you mentioned a Sherpa, we did have two Sherpa guides who were at Camp 4, and the idea was that they would be there kind of for safety, and ideally we would have even them go a little bit ahead of me to kind of scout out how the trail was, and
Right.
how the snow was and how the ropes were. And I could see from quite a bit farther down that they had already turned around by the time I was arriving at Camp 4, which I figured was a bad sign. And so I kind of came into Camp 4 thinking, oh, this is maybe not the best news. And it was, like you said, these guys had a lot of experience. They'd summited Everest a lot of times. And they said, it's just not going to happen, man. And so could I have gone up by myself in waist deep snow without fixed ropes? Yeah, I could have theoretically, but that's not something that's not a risk level that I'm comfortable with. Over 1,000 meters with no lines on an exposed part of the route, that just didn't feel like something that was worthwhile to me, especially since I knew that given how heavy the snow was, it wasn't going to be a quick day. There was a lot of hours left. There were a lot of hours left to get to the summit, even if it was feasible. So it just, nothing made sense to continue going. Again, this is the decision-making calculus that we're making in a very tired and hypoxic state up at 8,000 meters.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's switch topics a little bit here and talk about the last couple of months and what you've been doing. So I know you've been doing some guiding and just some traveling on your own, both personally and then with us, and leading some trips for Chaski as well. So first, because I can't even keep track of how all the different places you've been, give us a basic overview of where you've been and what it's been like, because this is very different from being a month training and then trying to run up Mount Everest to
Yeah.
being the guide. And what have you learned in that experience, and sort of role reversal from being the person doing things to the person leading and guiding?
So I guess to start off with kind of a quick spark notes of where I've been, I think I gave the quick overview, but so I wrapped up the season in Nepal basically at the end of September with Chris Fisher. We went to Thailand for a few days to just kind of decompress, get some sea level air, get some good Thai food, and then flew back to the States from there, where I saw you guys in Massachusetts. And then we flew to California for a wedding. And that was fantastic. And then from there over to Japan, where I was guiding a trip, a private trip. That was really fun. A trail running kind of exploration trip around Tokyo and Kyoto. Really, really great time there with a good buddy of mine. From there, I stayed in Japan a little bit longer, visited a friend, and then went from Japan back to Boston. Then we went to Toronto to visit a family member who just moved there. And finally back to Massachusetts, and now out here to Colorado. And then I'm going down to Chile in about 3 or 4 days before this episode will air. So yeah, I was just looking at my calendar, and I don't think I've slept in the same bed for more than a week since I left Quito, which was like in mid-August. It's been it's been a lot of living out of a suitcase. And, to an extent, I think that's fun and I enjoy it. It gets a little bit tiresome sometimes, especially I was a little bit sick the last couple of weeks. But it's definitely a nice change of pace from the monk monastery lifestyle to, real dedication to training, which I know there's plenty more of that coming up for me in the coming months. So I've been trying to remind myself to enjoy this time and enjoy seeing family and friends, and especially the guiding part, like you said, that for me is a really different part of the experience of being an athlete where it almost takes some of the pressure off of me. It's a different kind of pressure because suddenly I'm really focused on someone else's experience. Training and competing as an athlete can feel very selfish at times. And so it's nice to
Hmm.
be able to back out of your own desires and think, okay, what is the best thing for the people on this trip, for my athletes, making sure that they are safe, that they are having a great experience, that they are, well fed, that they are like the hotel, whatever it is, all those things. I really enjoy that, and from kind of like a caregiver aspect, and that makes me, it brings me a lot of happiness, and it's a really fun way to connect with people and share places that I really love, whether it's, Japan or Ecuador or Chile or anything like that. And I
Great.
guess the last thing I'll say in terms of training with all this, I wouldn't say I'm not training, especially after the first maybe 2 to 3 weeks. I've kind of gently ramped up exercise to the point where I'm probably training about 2 hours a day, which for me is still pretty low, but it's more that there really is a lot less structure. So when I was in Massachusetts with you guys, being able to just hop into workouts with my best friend Connor, that was really fun. Where, usually he and I are we're training for different things, or we're just at different stages of our competition. And here we kind of perfectly overlapped where he's really, really fit. And, the first couple workouts, I was actually riding the bicycle with him because I wasn't ready to keep up. And, he's getting ready for a marathon, is super fit. And so that was, that was a whole thing. But then by the end of the time there, I was like, okay, I could kind of hang on some of his workouts. And that was really fun because we don't usually get to work out together. And, it wasn't like this is the perfect workout to be doing to prepare me for some goal that's 6 months away. It was really just, this is a really fun way to spend time with my best friend and enjoy working hard together on a beautiful autumn day. So kind of just embracing the more type 1 fun side of training and kind of fitting that in around other life obligations has been a nice break as well from the opposite, which would be fitting life obligations around very regimented training.
Uh-huh. Okay. And so this kind of different set of activities, leading trips and other things, how does this fit into your overall vision for your career? Is this something you're going to do more of in the future, or was this more of just a one-time thing here during your break?
So I've tried to lead, I'd say at least 2 trips a year, probably for the last, basically since COVID, when we kind of founded Chaski and brought the travel portion in as well. Once kind of quarantine stuff loosened up a little bit. And like I said, I really love it. I really enjoy it, especially as I've, as my, renown, for lack of a better word, has grown a little bit. My audience has grown a little bit, and I can be a little bit more selective of who I work with. So I can really kind of cherry pick the groups that we're leading and where I'm taking people, so that it's something that I'm really excited about, and it feels less like work and it feels more like I'm just kind of taking people who I like to a really cool place. And so I really like that. It definitely is a lot of work. It's a lot of mental and physical and logistical energy, to kind of be on like that and make sure that, I'm really 100% focused on someone else's experience for that week or two. So it's not something that I want to do all the time, but I really enjoy it. And yeah, I think this schedule of doing, maybe 2 trips a year, something like that, especially if I can schedule as I'm still competing professionally in my more or less off season, that seems to be a really, really good fit for me. So it's definitely something I want to keep doing. And especially the Atacama trip, which I'm leading starting in about 10 days, like that's my favorite trip that we ever do. And, I'll definitely keep doing that one, hopefully, every year, if not maybe twice a year.
Okay. Okay. So looking ahead to the spring of 2026, a new year, we're just
Yep.
about there. It's hard to believe the year is almost over, but it is. So without getting into too many specifics, I know you're thinking about quite seriously about another attempt at your favorite mountain in the whole world, Mount Everest, in spring of 2026. And, we can joke and say, after Rocky and Bullwinkle, this time for sure.
This time for sure.
This time
I
for
keep
sure.
thinking
But
that.
where's your mind at now? And what does your decision-making process look like?
I think especially how this season played out, I feel like the project is unfinished, and that I don't think I'll ever be able to really exhale until it is finished. So in the spring, I remember we talked about this idea that after the second attempt, before Chris and I went back for that very last one, it felt very anticlimactic because I felt like I hadn't pushed my body all the way. It felt like we'd basically been turned around by the mountain. And that was kind of how I felt after this attempt in the fall. After both, I never really felt like I left 100% of my effort out there on the mountain, which there's nothing you could do about that, right? You know, in this instance, I don't think it would have been productive to continue going like we talked about before. So that I think leaves the box a little bit more open. I do think I've thought a lot about how to think about this in the long term because it's one of these things where every time I've gone, I know that I've physically been capable of doing it. And it's a matter of getting these externalities lined up in a way that they're, if we can get kind of like C plus conditions across the board from the mountain and the weather and the gear and the people on the mountain crowds, all these things, if we can get to kind of like 70% on all of them, then I think we'll be fine. But we haven't had that. Like every single time there's been some kind of thing that has been at, 20% or 10%. And that's a big problem because if one of those externalities is out of whack, then it's catastrophic for the whole project. So I've thought a lot about this idea and okay, like, do we just keep kicking the can out down the road? Like, I don't really want to do this for the rest of my life. And are there any ways that we can accommodate for any of those things and try to push the needle more in our favor, take any of that risk off the table? It's hard to say because I don't think that there is much more you can do on the South Side other than just keep showing up. Des Linden, who is an American woman who won the Boston Marathon, kind of made that saying famous, at least among runners, of just, you just got to keep showing up. And if you keep showing up to major marathons like she did, she was second, she was third in the Boston Marathon a bunch of times before she won because everything just has to come together on the right day. But it took her like 10 years, and I don't really want to spend 10 years on Everest. So there is the other side of that, which is, like I only have so much patience to keep showing up on this project because there's two sides. One is the opportunity cost, that it's incredibly costly in terms of training, in terms of finances, in terms of the time it takes. And the other is literal physical danger and risk, which we've talked about a lot. And you're stacking that risk every time you go up there. I did have a really scary fall into a crevasse in the ice fall this season, and that is something I've been thinking about a lot. So, it's one of these things where I know it's possible and it's just, you do have to get a little bit lucky. I have thought more about the South Side versus the North Side. I would say that is kind of the one thing that is maybe more exciting to me about the project. The North Side has its own complications, but I do feel like some of the externalities that we've talked about as problematic are a little bit more controllable on the North Side. There is no ice fall, so the route is objectively much safer. There are fewer people climbing. I think there are fewer pinch points in general. It has its own problems in terms of the logistics of getting there. The visas with getting into Tibet is complicated. So it has its own issues. It's not perfect. But when I think about the spring and I just kind of meditate on it, it definitely feels less, I feel less of a sense of dread of returning. Like I do feel a sense of dread when I think about the ice fall and going back there and going through again. And, if you told me Tibet was going to be closed for the next 10 years, I could probably get my head around that and go back and go up and down through the ice fall a handful of times. I know people do it all the time. The Sherpa do it 10 or 20 times a season, but it doesn't make it less scary. It doesn't make it less intimidating. And it doesn't make it safe. So, as much as I would like to stay in Nepal, that's kind of the biggest, pivot that I've been thinking of. But I would say right now we're in the decision-making process still and looking at all options and, trying to figure that out.
Yeah, it's a tough situation because, you have several weakest link problems, as we call them,
Right.
where
Exactly.
so that's really difficult because you can deal maybe, you don't have to get quite as lucky if you just have one or maybe even two, where if they don't get above threshold, you're done. But you have probably on the order of four or five. And if any of them goes really badly and
Yeah.
you don't get at least as you, whatever your threshold is, whatever you want to call it, 70% or whatever, it spoils the whole thing. So that
Right.
is really tough and seems to me to be very different even from other really big mountains like Manaslu and others.
Yeah.
So Everest is a unique beast in that sense. And certainly, again, as your parent, I will be much happier if you never go through the ice fall again and you don't spend 10 years trying to do this, even if you're doing it without going through the ice fall. So you've talked a little bit about maybe the north side. Are there any other lessons or anything else you would think about doing significantly differently if you go ahead based on your lessons from the spring and fall 2025 attempts?
I mean, they say that, insanity is just doing the same thing and expecting different results. But honestly, like I don't know what else to change at this point. I feel like the preparation that I did was about as good as I could do. And so it's really, it's about just getting lucky at this point. It's about being really fit and being in the right place at the right time. And
Yep.
so the fitness side, I know how to do that at this point. I know I can do that again. And really, it's about, okay, when you're on the mountain, is there anything, little tweaks that we can do to, like you said, try and prevent those weakest link problems? Is there different or better gear that we can have so we don't have to worry about that? Is there, different timing that we can try and use? Anything like that? I haven't come up with any fantastic answers, honestly, and that's part of what's frustrating is it really does seem, other than the big pivot, which is moving to the north side, which I think does remove some of that. Then on the south side, I don't really think that there's that much that could be done differently. I really think that the truly best case scenario is pretty much what our plan was going into last spring, the very first attempt, which is you get really, really fit, you get acclimated early, and you're ready to go on the absolutely first feasible window. And you just basically follow the Sherpa rope fixers all the way to the summit. It's before all the crowds go. The mountain will be colder, but it'll be more solid in terms of avalanche and icefall danger. There won't be that many crowds high up on the mountain. And yeah, that to me, that's still the best, it's the plan with the highest chance of success. And it also leaves you with the opportunity to go later in the season if it doesn't go well. So I still think that's the best plan. I still stick with that. And if I were going next week, that would be the plan that I would stick to. And training and preparation, I would pretty much try and repeat what I did in the summer.
Okay. All right. So now let's pivot from the real Everest attempt to Everesting. So
Yeah,
is that a thing? Is that a word?
it is a thing. I
Everesting.
think it might even be like trademarked or copyrighted. So maybe we'll
Okay.
get taken
So
down. We'll see.
let's talk about this Everesting world record attempt at the La Sportiva store in Boulder, Colorado in a few weeks. Walk us through exactly what this is and where the idea came from.
So the idea with Everesting, which again I think might be trademarked, so maybe we're using their term, but it's essentially the idea of climbing the vertical height of Everest. So Everest is 8848 meters, which is 29,029 feet. And the idea is either on foot or on a bicycle to climb that much. Now, obviously, there's no single hill in the world that is 29,000 feet tall other than Everest, which would be climbing it from the ocean. So what people have done in these, events, they actually have like basically races where people will do this is they'll rent out like a ski slope and you just like run up and down the ski slope. Or they have like, I think they call them shuttle versions where people will run up and take a ski lift down. And you repeat that however many times until you accumulate 29,000 feet of elevation gain, which, yeah, it's a cool challenge. And, with the theme of this last couple of years, it's the end of the year, and we wanted to do it's a fundraiser for the Chaski Foundation as well. We were thinking about year-end fundraisers and talking with Sportiva. They were super excited about it. And the idea is we are going to do a attempt at the world record to do this on a treadmill, which will be in the La Sportiva store. It'll be a public event, which is really cool. I've done a bunch of these treadmill things before. And by far the coolest one I ever did was at the Boston Marathon Expo. I think it was
I remember that.
14 maybe. And, it's cool because especially when we do long stuff, like 95% of the time we're out in the middle of nowhere with no one around. And when you do a treadmill thing, they're kind of corny, but at the same time, it is really cool to be able to have a whole bunch of people around you and watching you. And especially something like this, that's going to take many hours, you guys, if you're there, hopefully like you can, come watch the start, then go get lunch, come back, say hi, go get another meal, come back, watch the finish, So you can kind of have people meandering in and about. And then ideally, when you get close to the end, people get excited and there's a crowd and stuff like that. So I find these events to be very, very fun. And I'm excited about it. It's definitely a fun kind of early season challenge for me where it gives me something to focus on and look forward to as I've kind of just been casually training for the last couple of months, and I have almost exactly a month until this event. So it's something that felt like it's a fun challenge for me. It's a great fundraising opportunity. It'll be a cool La Sportiva centric event because it's in their flagship store here in Boulder. And yeah, I'm really, really excited about it. And I think the current world record is around 12 hours. So I think hopefully we'll be under 10 is the idea. That's kind of what we're looking at. I'm actually doing kind of a bigger training session tomorrow where I'll kind of try and simulate maybe the first third or half of that distance and get a better sense of pacing. But yeah, I definitely think it's within my wheelhouse, and it's pretty exciting.
Okay. So you already said the current world record, which is around 12 hours, and you're targeting under 10 hours, so a big break of the world record.
Let's see. Yeah.
How does climbing 8,848 meters on a treadmill compare with physically and mentally attempting to do that on the actual Mount Everest?
I mean, other than the fact that you're moving uphill, they're pretty much similar in name only, I would say. Um, Most of the challenges of climbing Everest have to do with the hypoxia and the terrain that you're on. Because here's the thing, like climbing the height of Everest is way more climbing than you're going to be doing when you climb Everest, even from base camp, which almost no one does because base camp is 5,300 meters up. So you're only climbing 3,500 meters up at that point, which I think is about 12,000 feet. So, whatever that is, it's about a third, maybe 40% of the total height of the mountain is what you're climbing at that point. Whereas on the treadmill, it's more total climbing, but it's a constant altitude. We will not be using the altitude machine on this to simulate. Someone actually asked me that. They're like, are you going to like use the altitude machine and like notch it up every time? And I was like, that would take so long. That would be so much harder. And that would be a very different kind of thing, which is actually way more similar to the kind of training things I would do in keto when I was really preparing for the Everest climb itself. But no, this is a much more, I would say, of just a fitness test in terms of kind of leg strength and aerobic strength. We will be at a little bit of altitude because I think Boulder is about maybe 6,000 feet, maybe like 1,800 meters. So, it's not sea level. We kind of like are doing it on like medium mode, not hard mode, but it'll be a solid challenge. I know it will be hard regardless of how it goes. It'll be hard. But yeah, in terms of comparing it to actually climbing Everest, like yeah, it's pretty much in name only, other than the fact that they'll both be hard, but in their own distinct ways.
Yep. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the event itself. So you mentioned that this is also a fundraiser for Chaski, and I know you mentioned that it supports youth athletes in Nepal and Ecuador. So tell us in a little more detail what that's about and why this mission is so important to you.
Yeah, so the Chaski Foundation is our C3 nonprofit, and a big project that we have launched this year is trying to develop some youth athlete programs both in Nepal and Ecuador, which are places where I have very deep roots and deep connections to the local communities. And they were both projects that specifically kind of came to me. I spent a lot of time in my 20s kind of learning about service essentially with my previous company, Strive. And one of the big things that we learned and learned to do was really look to the communities we serve for ideas for projects as opposed to coming in with our own agenda. And so we have a specific group in Ecuador that actually already exists that we're looking to support and help them develop. And then in Nepal has so much potential in terms of athletics, both as a performance side as well as a way for kids to feel empowered and have an outlet in this incredibly beautiful country that they have. And there's just very, very little infrastructure and resources to support that. So I've been asked a lot of times by people there, how can we do this? How can you help? Can you provide coaching? Can you provide organizations, gear, all these kinds of things? And so we've developed plans in both those countries on opposite sides of the world, but very exciting projects that we have in the mix. And we started this fundraiser with my Everest climb in Nepal in August and September. And now we're looking to hopefully continue it and really get it launched by the end of the year. So we'll have links to that if you want to donate ahead of time. That'll be in the show notes and on my social media. And we'll also have stuff going on at the event where you can learn more about it, what we're trying to do, and any donations that you guys want to give is greatly appreciated. All of it will go towards funding these projects.
Great. Very exciting. And yes, we encourage everybody who is interested and has the wherewithal to donate as you see fit. So again, just back to logistics, when and where will this event happen and how can people participate? And is there an online participation beyond being in the store in person?
Absolutely. So the event will be on Sunday, December 1st. That is the Sunday before Christmas. It will be in the flagship La Sportiva store, which is in downtown Boulder. It's right on Pearl Street, which is a fantastic little walking district. I'm not from the area, but I've been there a handful of times now, and it's a really fun place to kind of walk around and do your last minute Christmas shopping. So it will be there basically all day on the 21st. 21st. We will shoot to finish around, I think the store closes around 5 p.m. But by the time this is released, we should have more details about the exact timing. So you can swing by at any point on the 21st and say hi. I will be walking and running uphill all day as long as the store is open. And then, yeah, hopefully we'll be shooting to finish and have a little after party right as the store is closing, probably around 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And we'll have more details there. And thanks to our fantastic Chaski web developer, Brett Van Dorn, we will also have the ability to follow this event online from around the world. He built, if you are a longtime fan, you will remember our Chaski Challenge from back in 2020 when we had this really wild series of races on treadmills from like around the world during COVID quarantine. You know, we had people in like Japan and Europe and the United States and South America all racing each other at the same time on treadmills. It was live streamed, and Brett Van Dorn built this really cool tracking system so you could see exactly who was where relative to each other, kind of like a little horse race going on. So he's also building a tracker and live stream that will be available for free to all of you guys on race day. So you can follow live. Honestly, the stream will probably mostly be really boring, but I'm sure Brett's tracker will make it really engaging. But yeah, if you want to watch me like sweat and, eat some candy and stuff for 8 hours, you can totally do that. But you can definitely keep an eye on it kind of like as your day progresses, check in every hour and see how we're doing. So we'll send out all the details and links and everything as we get closer to the event, but definitely that's something to get excited about. So yeah, mark your calendars, December 21st, and I hope to see a whole lot of you in Boulder in the store.
Yay, Brett. And I do remember that craziness and right around the COVID time frame when everybody was racing all over the world. And yes, it was Race Central in our house, as I recall. It was
Yeah.
quite something. Yep. Okay. So let's talk a little bit now looking forward. So you've had the substantial break. You've talked about a lot here. What does it look like getting back into structured training?
So I think it's going to be kind of gradual. Like I said, I've kind of plateaued around this 2 hours a day mark is kind of where I've honestly tried to kind of cap myself there. So I'm not doing more than that because I don't want to get greedy. I don't want to get kind of over eager, as I know whatever I'm training for, whether it's Everest or something else, I'm my bigger goals will be in the late spring, and there's still a long time to go towards that. So now it's really about just kind of enjoying exercise and having it be a part of my life that I enjoy and feel good about, and here and there throwing in some quicker workouts, especially as I get ready for this Everesting event, maybe getting in a little bit more uphill on the treadmill just to get my body used to that, because that is a pretty specific motion, and I definitely don't want to be doing that for 8 or 10 hours for the first time. So I'll be doing a lot more uphill training over the next month, but really it still is it's much more flexible, I would say. I don't really write out a really specific calendar. It's more I do a little bit more vibes-based training, I would say, as that's kind of become a very popular word with coding, like vibes coding. Now we're vibes training. And that's kind of been my style so far. And especially over the next 2 weeks, I've got, the Camp Chaski Atacama trip coming up where, again, like when I was in Japan, that's very much more focused on making sure the group is having a positive experience. And my training just kind of comes from that. It's a very active trip. We do a lot of very high altitude hiking and jogging. So I think that'll be really nice preparation. And then with the Everesting record, right before Christmas, I think that kind of sets me up really well to really start focusing a little bit more on training when I get back to my home base in Quito around the 1st of January. So that's the tentative plan right now, is kind of really continuing to not put a ton of training pressure on myself for the next these last whatever it is 6 or 7 weeks of the year. Get fit, but kind of enjoy it, have fun with it, and then really start thinking about focusing on training around the beginning of 2026.
Okay. And then finally, my last question for you. So looking at the bigger picture, you've got this Everesting event at the end of the year in Boulder, and then some big decisions to make regarding 2026. So given your tendency to make lists, have you made a new list, like that first 16-item list that many of our listeners might remember, where the first rule was don't get greedy and the last rule was don't die? So that was the one we should, as your parent, I thought that one should be first. But are
Yeah.
there any particular mantras, reminders, lists you're making for yourself to really lean on in the coming year?
So the short answer is no, I have not made a new list yet. I actually still have both of those original lists. They're actually at your house. And I think maybe that's like a December activity, is reviewing those. item by item and thinking about if there's additions I want to make. I think that don't get greedy and don't die are like probably the most important takeaways, honestly, from both of those. If I were to go back to Everest in April, May, and I have thought about this of kind of what the next 6-ish months would look like, I think it's really important to, it's kind of not get greedy is basically just not get overeager, like not rush into things like I've talked about a lot of times on this episode. And so one of the ways I've thought about doing that is basically having a very different kind of event that I prepare for, maybe sometime in February, which is kind of halfway, that would be more of a running race, either an ultra or even like a road marathon. I've thought of that could be really fun to do, but just something that's lower pressure, that's a very different kind of physical stimulus to prepare for. Because, basically from January through October, it was one kind of training, and that was like walking uphill with a pack on. And I think it is important to mix things up for the body and the mind to just do things differently. Even these last couple of weeks of doing a little bit more quicker running with Connor has been really, really fun. And I've enjoyed that. And thinking about, okay, what if it were, 3 months of kind of more running training and then 3 months of really much more uphill training and weighted pack training to get ready for an Everest climb. I think that could work out really well. So to answer your question again, no, I don't have a list, but I have thought about that kind of like macro level. And I'd say that's the kind of biggest thing is thinking about, don't think about Everest yet. If you're going to go back, we're going to prepare for that in 2026. And right now, thinking about just getting fit, having fun with training, and using it as a way to spend time with friends and family, really.
Okay. Anything else you want to add? That's the end of my set of questions.
No, I think we're good. Let's wrap it there. I'll read us out, and hopefully we'll be back next week. It might be 2 weeks, depending on my schedule with the Atacama, but definitely once we get to the end of the year, then we'll be back in our weekly schedule as training becomes more of an exciting thing to talk about. But for now, thank you guys all so much for listening. We are so excited to be back. Please send us any feedback, your questions, concerns, comments, hopes, dreams. You can send those all to my email, ty@chaski.run, or DM me, Tyler C. Andrews, on Instagram. Remember, we will also have this on Substack, where we will resume our raw training logs. Those will go up probably starting in December, and you can get that delivered to your email at tylercandrews.substack.com. Tyler's Training is a Chaski Media production and brought to you by the Chaski Foundation, the world's only nonprofit supporting coaching, traveling community for endurance athletes. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We're so excited to be back, and we will talk to you soon. Okay, ciao.